Hey folks, welcome back to another edition of Reading Through the New Testament in a Year. Today we find ourselves in Hebrews chapter 3, and if ever there was a passage that we needed to hear, this possibly is the one. The opening section of chapter 3 starts and finishes with a call for endurance. We begin with encouragement to keep our thoughts fixed on Jesus. And then we sort of end with an appeal to hold on to confidence and hope. Precisely what we need to do in the midst of this global storm that we're facing in 2020. It's a struggle, I know, but finding ways to keep our thoughts fixed on Jesus is going to be of central importance in the days that lie ahead. We won't have regular gatherings. We won't have home groups and Bible studies. We won't have midweek prayer groups to go to. We're going to miss that regular fellowship. So we've got to look out for new and creative ways to keep the fires of our faith ignited. This opening section is entitled in the NIV, Jesus Greater Than Moses. And so the evidence for that claim is put forward. Jesus is described as our apostle and high priest. He's an apostle in that he is sent to represent God before men, to act and speak on God's behalf. And he's a high priest in that he represents men before God, offering a sacrifice for our sin. Moses was the only Old Testament person to fulfill both of these functions, so he pointed us toward Jesus in that respect. Moses was a faithful servant of the Lord who God used to do amazing things. But here the writer to the Hebrews says, look to Jesus. He's the ultimate apostle. He's the ultimate high priest. He was the ultimate one who was faithful to his Father's will. Remember, this book is written to persuade Jewish Christians not to reject Jesus by returning to their old covenant roots. So the writer encourages them to see and know that they are part of God's house. And the same applies to us today by extension. God's house is both the nation of Israel led by Moses in the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, and the multinational diverse church led by the apostles in the New Testament, the New Covenant. Remember, we're invited in to God's story. And when we enter in, we see that we become a part of God's house, God's family, God's church that he's been building throughout history. And Jesus is both builder and Lord over that house. So we're told in verse 6 to hold firm to our confidence and the hope in which we glory. That is to say, we ought to persevere. We have confidence that comes from knowing that our entrance into his church and family has been given to us by grace. We didn't earn it, but we must persevere in our faith. We must hold on to the grace that God gives us. Trials may come, and we know that all too well today. We never know what's around the corner in our lives, but we have an eternal hope found and secured in Jesus, a hope that outweighs all the troubles that this life may bring. The second half of the chapter gives a stark warning then not to fall away, and then encourages us to spur one another on in our faith, in our belief in God. We're given a reference from Psalm 95, and that's re-emphasized later on. And it's through this passage that our minds are transported back to a time of rebellion, as the psalmist puts it, a time of unbelief when the Israelites were lost in the wilderness for a long time, some 40 years. It was a time of difficulty and dismay. It was a time of weariness and fatigue, a time of wondering and yearning for something else. And it came about at a crucial moment of blessing. In fact, the Lord had just rescued his people and secured their freedom from the power of Egypt. God had carried them out of the bondage of slavery, through the Red Sea, and out into a new and exciting future. But it was then that they started to forget. They let what they knew to be true slip out of their minds. They became like a ship drifting off course. And it resulted in a total rejection of the Lord and his ways. Their unbelief won out. And folks, really it was because of sin lurking around every corner, waiting to entice us. Even as we come through great times in life, moments of joy and blessing, moments when we feel close to God, maybe more so than ever before we know it, right around the corner, we end up lost, all at sea, with our faith hanging by a thread. Sin has a way of taking our eyes off the Lord, and it leaves us without hope. So in the midst of today's storm, in the midst of the turmoil and uncertainty that 2020 has brought about with this coronavirus, the words of Hebrews 3 are as important as anything else you'll hear. See to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart that turns away from the living God. But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness. We have come to share in Christ, if indeed we hold our original conviction firmly to the very end. Let's keep looking out for our neighbours who are in need. Let's remember our brothers and sisters in prayer before the Lord. And let's keep our eyes and thoughts fixed on Jesus, encouraging one another to hold on to the hope that we find only in him. Until tomorrow, stay safe and God bless.